Throughout the years, women have been fighting to change society's views on gender roles and how women are viewed within society. With each small success comes new changes to those approaches. Starting with the women's rights movement in the 19th century, we see an explosion of women writers and their effect on the feminist movement. We see just how important women writers were and are today as they give a voice to the millions of other women fighting to be heard and motivating others to become involved with the war on society. Join me as we explore just a small portion of these women and study the changes in their approaches as they change from the 19th century to the 21st. Most every girl now knows the book title Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, but little understand just how important Kaur's collection of poetry and acts within society truly are. Rupi Kaur was born into a Sikh family in Punjab, India, and eventually immigrated to Canada with her parents when she was a very young girl. Her mother inspired her to create through drawing and painting, which we see on each page of both books she's published. Kaur studied rhetoric and professional writing at the University of Waterloo and drew inspiration from scholars such as Alice Walker and Sharon Olds. Through her mother's support of her art and the study and inspiration of powerful women scholars and writers, she went to publish her first book, an anthology titled Milk and Honey. Kaur explains that her inspiration for the book's name came from a poem that included a line about women surviving terrible times and describes the changes in women as being smooth as milk and thick as honey. Throughout her poetry, Kaur explores the themes of love, loss, trauma, healing, femininity, migration, abuse, self-care, and heartbreak. Even outside of writing, Kaur has produced acts of protest against society's views on women, particularly the menstrual taboos. In 2015, she posted a series of photos on Instagram of herself with menstrual bloodstains on clothing and bedsheets. Kaur explained them as pieces of visual poetry, which formed her final project for her undergraduate studies. As expected, the photos were taken down for violating Instagram's terms of service, but were eventually brought back after being criticized for responding in a way in which the works were meant to critique. Kaur's act of protest against society's views on women and their body is parallel to that of Emily Dickinson's own acts. Because of early feminists and women writers such as Dickinson, books and acts such as Kaur's have become possible. However, instead of putting herself out into the world as Kaur does, she chose to stay solitary and confined within her own walls as not to ever take on the secondary role as an inferior woman, and chose to write instead. Much of Emily Dickinson's writing voiced the suppression of women writers and challenged gender roles, much of it stating that we can become more than what society tells us to. We just have to believe and act upon it. However, Dickinson was more than a feminist hero. She was also an outstanding writer as she tackles more than just themes of feminism and gender roles, such as death, mortality, and grief. Writers such as Dickinson in the 19th century paved the way for future women writers by proving that women were more than housewives, but also intellectuals. Much like in Dickinson's writing, we see Kaur and many other women poets explore ideas of trauma, death, and grief and how they grew from those experiences into something much more powerful. Not only is poetry being used by women writers to expose the struggles of living in a greatly misogynist professional world, but they're teaching young girls how to grow from these experiences and discover who they are. Women writers don't only have to speak on feminism and gender roles within their writing to challenge them. Many great women authors may not even touch on the subject in their writing, but instead embody it through their success and work ethic. A great example of this is Mbolo Mbio. Mbio is a native of the seaside town of Limbe, Cameroon, who moved to and has lived in the United States for more than a decade. In 2008, Mbio lost her job during the middle of the financial crisis and through looking for work started a writing project that would eventually become Behold the Dreamers. She took inspiration from Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon to begin writing out of college. She went to graduate school for education and never even considered the chance to take on writing as a career. In an interview, she explains, "I did not do it because I wanted to one day have a book deal. I did it because I loved it and I enjoyed it, and I did not know where it was going to take me. I did it out of the love of the art." She wrote what she knew, her experiences in struggling to live the American dream as an immigrant in a time of financial crisis. Behold the Dreamers is a complex, realist novel that explores the perspectives of an immigrant couple from Cameroon amongst the presence of their wealthy white employers. Mbio shines a light on how inaccessible the American dream can be for minorities. The book was noted by the Washington Post as the one book Donald Trump should read now. It didn't start as a representation of the struggles of immigrants in America. She was just writing what she knew. Although Imbu originally had no intention of writing a purposely strategic and empowering piece, it shows just how much power a writer has. She writes a raw story with no manufactured happy endings. It shows that women like Imbu have had to work their way through life just like men do, and have the intellectual and literary ability to write about real-life problems and financial and economic struggles. Reading about writers such as Mbolo Imbu reminds us just how far we have come in the world of literature as far as women writers. When looking back in early literature, many women were scorned for using their voice when speaking out about things such as politics, patriarchy, economics, and other seemingly unladylike conversations. To use such a raw voice when telling a story should be shocking and threatening to other male colleagues. This again shows us just how far we have come thanks to the early women writers who paved the way for women of today. A good example of early women writers using their voice when it came to political issues is the Civil War. Many women writers took this as a chance to reveal their stance on the war and wrote stories depicting them. Rebecca Harding Davis published a short story named David Gaunt to illustrate the detrimental impact of the war on families that were left behind. A big change between then and now is the idea that back within the 19th century and earlier, women writers were quite rare in comparison to men, and when they wrote, they often had to put everything into it and write with the purpose of spreading a message or intellect, and were often being held to lower standards, making it harder to write for enjoyment. Now we see many more women writers writing because of their love for it, even if they are not writing to necessarily share a message or expose ugly truths, but create beautiful things. Of course, this is not to say that there are not still struggles amongst the writing community when it comes to women writers. Many women still publish using their initials or under different names in order to get certain genres, such as science fiction, to sell to common audiences. Although the freedom of women writers has come a long way, we still have a lot longer to go. Adichie was born in the city of Enugu, Nigeria, into an Igbo family of 5 other children. From a young age, Adichie had a strong woman figure in her life, her mother. Her mother, Grace, was the first female registrar at the University of Nigeria, where Adichie would eventually study medicine and pharmacy along with her sister. At the age of 19, Adichie left for the United States in order to study communications and political science, where she first experienced the meaning behind being a person of color in the United States. Throughout her time in the United States, she had to navigate what race as an idea meant. In 2003, Adichie completed a master's degree in creative writing at Johns Hopkins University, and in 2008 she received a Master's of Arts degree in African Studies from Yale University. Today she divides her time between Nigeria and United States teaching writing workshops, and is one of the most famous feminist writers of the 21st century and specializes in intersectional feminism, which notes the lack of attention to race, class, sexual orientation, and gender identity in early feminist movements. Adichie's motivation to bring out the underrepresented voices of the feminist movement remind us what early women writers and feminists started out fighting for: equality. One of Adichie's most well-known works is a speech she gave for TED in late 2012 entitled "We Should All Be Feminists," which eventually became a published book in 2014. The speech initiated a worldwide conversation on feminism and was even sampled for the song "Flawless" by singer Beyoncé, which brought even more attention to it. In 2014, she was interviewed, and Adichie commented on the idea of her being a feminist writer. "I think of myself as a storyteller, but I would not mind at all if someone were to think of me as a feminist writer. I am very feminist in the way I look at the world, and that worldview must somehow be part of my work." Adichie talked about her experience as an African feminist and her ideas of sexuality and gender construction, and how gender seems to shape who we are. "I am angry. Gender as it functions today is a grave injustice. We should all be angry. Angry has a long history of bringing out positive change, but in addition to being angry, I am hopeful because I believe deeply in the ability of human beings to make and remake themselves for the better." Adichie's work and ideologies are a great example of the third wave of feminism and what seems to be the fourth wave, in which we are moving into now with this new generation of feminists. She concentrates a great deal on the idea of gender and how it defines us, along with how race and class affect both those in the United States and around the world. Here lies another parallel between early women writers such as Nella Larsen, who explores this idea of race and gender and how it seems to define who we are. In her story Passing, she shows us how women use the act of passing to identify a certain way in order to possess something they may otherwise be unable to because of who they are identified as by society. The idea of race and class being part of the feminist movement, however, was not brought to light until the third wave of feminism, and because of this, we don't see many early women writers bringing it to light through literature, as the main focus was gaining a voice for women in general at the time and breaking out of societal gender roles. Therefore, the biggest change amongst women writers and feminists today is the inclusion of race and minorities. As times change, so do our ideologies, literature, and how we go about promoting necessary societal reformation. Women writers will continue to change and adapt their approaches and ideas as we slowly make our way closer to what early women started fighting for.